Chapter 1: The Mirror in the Hall. My family moved into our house when I was 7. It was an older house, built in the 1940s, and it came with some things the previous owners had left behind: a workbench in the garage, some garden tools, and a large mirror in the hallway.
Floor to ceiling, dark wood frame, slightly spotted with age in the upper corners. My parents kept it because it was nice, and because moving a mirror that size is more effort than it's worth.
I grew up with that mirror, walked past it every day for 11 years. I know exactly what it looked like. The slight distortion at the left edge, where the glass was old and uneven, the dark spots in the corners, the way it reflected the hallway light in the evenings with a particular warm quality that newer mirrors don't have. I moved out at 18, came back occasionally for holidays and weekends. The mirror was always there. When I was 23, I came home for my parents' anniversary and stayed for a long weekend. On the second night, I got up at around 2 a.m. to get water from the kitchen. The hallway was dark except for the light under the bathroom door. I walked past the mirror. I don't know what made me stop and look at it. I'm not someone who looks at mirrors in the dark. But I stopped and looked, and what I saw took me a moment to process. My reflection was not doing what I was doing. I was standing still, looking at the mirror. My reflection was facing slightly to the left, not dramatically, maybe 10 degrees off from where I was actually looking. Just enough to be wrong. Just enough that the face in the mirror was looking at something that wasn't there. I stood for a long time looking at this. I told myself it was the dark, the old glass, the distortion at the left edge. I told myself I was half asleep and my perception was off. I raised my right hand. My reflection raised its left hand. Correct.
I tilted my head right. My reflection tilted its head left. Correct. But it was still facing 10 degrees to the left.
I went back to bed. In the morning, the mirror was normal. I checked deliberately, stood in front of it, moved, and my reflection matched perfectly. I said nothing to my parents. 3 months later, my mother called and mentioned, casually, that she had been meaning to have the mirror in the hallway looked at. She said sometimes at night, it looked like her reflection was looking at something she couldn't see. She said she assumed it was the old glass. I told her I had noticed the same thing. We agreed it was probably the glass. Neither of us has said anything about it since. But I check the mirror every time I go home. I check it carefully, and sometimes in the morning it's fine, and sometimes at night it isn't. And I have still not thought of an explanation that satisfies me for why my reflection is sometimes looking at something I can't see. Man må sove så sektor a secret. Med värmen den seekers now I bubble. Chapter 2: The Dream. 4 people I know had the same dream. I want to be careful about how I present this because I'm aware of how it sounds. I'm not someone who puts stock in shared dreams or collective unconscious or any of the frameworks people use to make this kind of thing meaningful. I'm presenting it as a set of facts and letting you decide what to do with them. The 4 people are myself, my college roommate, a woman I worked with for 2 years, and my brother. We are not a particularly connected group. My roommate and my coworker have never met, and my brother knows my roommate only slightly. We did not discuss dreams with each other during the period in question. The dream was not triggered by a shared experience, a shared piece of media, or anything else I have been able to identify. The dream is this: a long corridor, institutional looking, with fluorescent lighting and a linoleum floor. Doors on both sides, evenly spaced, all closed. You are walking down the corridor, and the doors are numbered, though none of us can remember the numbers clearly in retrospect, only that they were sequential and that you could see there were many of them ahead. At the end of the corridor, there is a door that is slightly different from the others, larger or a different color, or simply different in a way that is immediately apparent, but hard to describe. You walk toward it, and as you get close, you become aware that you don't want to open it, and then you wake up. I had this dream in February. I mentioned it to my roommate in passing. 2 months later, because something reminded me of it, he went quiet and said he had had the same dream. He described the corridor, the doors, the end door. He had had it in March. I mentioned it to my coworker in the summer, not looking for a connection, just telling her about a strange dream I'd had. She interrupted me before I finished describing it and said she had had that dream. She had had it in April. My brother called me in October to tell me he'd had a strange dream. I asked him to describe it before I said anything. He described the corridor. He described the doors. He described the end door and the feeling of not wanting to open it and waking up before he did. He had had it in September. 4 people, 4 different months, the same dream in enough detail that each of them was able to finish the other's description. I have spent considerable time looking for an explanation and have not found one that covers all 4 cases. I have not had the dream again. As far as I know, none of the others have either. I think about the door at the end of the corridor sometimes. I think about what might be behind it. I think about the fact that 4 people walked toward it and woke up before they got there, and I find that I am not sorry that none of us opened it. Chapter 3. The Child. My aunt and uncle bought an old farmhouse when they retired. Stone walls, low ceilings, exposed beams, the kind of house that has settled into the landscape over a long time and looks like it belongs there. It was built in the late 1700s and had been many things over the centuries, most recently a vacation rental before my aunt and uncle bought it and made it their permanent home. They were happy there. I want to be clear about that. They loved the house and they loved the life they had built in it. What I'm going to tell you did not make them unhappy in any simple or dramatic way. It was more complicated than that. About a year after they moved in, my aunt started hearing a child in the house. Not frequently, not dramatically. Occasionally, in the early mornings or the late evenings, she would hear what sounded like a child moving in one of the upstairs rooms, footsteps, the particular lightness of a small person's step. She and my uncle had no children at home. There were no children nearby. The nearest house was over a mile away. She told my uncle. He said he hadn't heard it. She accepted this. She was a light sleeper, and he wasn't. And the sounds came at times when he was often still asleep or already downstairs. She wasn't frightened by it. She described it as just a presence, the way a house has a presence. She said it felt like something from a long time ago that hadn't quite finished. In the second year, my uncle heard it too. He came into the kitchen one morning looking slightly confused and said he had heard a child on the landing. My aunt said she knew. He said, should they do something about it? She said she didn't think so. He agreed. They did not do something about it. They lived with it the way you live with a draft from an old window or a step that creaks as part of the character of the place. My aunt told me she had looked into the history of the house. In the mid-1800s, a family had lived there with several children. One of them, a girl of about 6, had died of fever one winter. My aunt said she didn't know if that explained the footsteps, and she wasn't sure it mattered. She said the house had held a lot of lives over 3 centuries, and she thought it was reasonable that some of them might still be there in some form. I visited them last spring and stayed for a long weekend. On the second morning, I woke early and lay in bed, listening to the house. After a few minutes, I heard it. Light footsteps in the hall outside my door. Going from left to right, toward the end of the hall where there was a small window seat where my aunt sometimes sat to read. I lay very still and listened until they stopped. Then I got up and opened my door. The hall was empty in the early light. At the end of the hall, on the window seat, there was a small depression in the cushion, as if someone small had been sitting there and had just gotten up. I went down to breakfast and told my aunt what I had heard. She nodded and said that was the window seat. The child seemed to like it there. She poured me coffee and asked if I had slept well, and we talked about other things. And I found that by the end of breakfast, I had mostly stopped thinking about the small depression in the cushion at the end of the hall. Mostly,